Hi, Dr. Connelly. Thank you for joining me. It's great to have you
Kendra,
here.
lovely to see you.
Yeah, so what we're doing today is Operation Warrior Resolution, as you know, is a nonprofit that got started because you created this really amazing and effective treatment, rapid resolution therapy. And we started the nonprofit to provide that therapy to veterans at no cost. And what we're doing today is I have you here joining us for our online holistic retreat that we're doing. So we're inviting all of those key players who are so influential in our organization and in creating a difference in veterans' lives. And it's in part of the Giving Challenge, which is an online fundraiser. And the Giving Challenge is from now until tomorrow, Wednesday at noon. Any donations, $25 to $100, will be matched by the Patterson Foundation. So it's a really great opportunity to raise awareness and get out there into the community. Operation Warrior Resolution and what we do, and the main aspect that we revolve our programs around and our veterans retreat around is rapid resolution therapy, because that's where the veterans have the most profound impact, because it causes immediate change in their life. And so I'm incredibly grateful that I have crossed paths with you and you have taught me everything I know. Of course, it's not nearly as much as you know, but I would love to hear more about rapid resolution therapy from you, so we can share this with others, and hopefully someone out there who hears about this may find rapid resolution therapy and benefit from it as well. So Dr. Connelly,
Hey,
thank you.
so Kendra, I'm just so excited about what you're doing. And I don't think I know anybody that works as hard or harder than you. You're you're so engrossed, involved in this mission all the time, and it's such an honor to know you and be in any way part of what you're doing. I'm honored that you've taken things that I've put together and brought them out to so many folks where I've been following what you're doing, where it seems to be making just a huge difference in so many people's lives. And I guess that's what gets you up and running, so that you're constantly working with this and pulling things together and making all of this happen.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, you've not only made a significant difference in my life, but everybody that I reach and touch is also changed because of you. So thank you.
We could just hang out and compliment each other a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, as much as I love your company, I want to chat more and hear more about rapid resolution therapy and the therapy itself. So who is this therapy good for?
So let me back up a bit, if I could, and then answer that, if I could. My background is that I, after college, I got a degree in history, by the way, in college, and I went looking for work. I figured now it's time for me to earn a living, and I looked at the help wanted ads to become a historian, and they didn't have any bachelor's level historian things to do, and I didn't know what to do, and I ended up taking a civil service test, and next thing I knew, I had a position where I was called a child protective service worker. And I did that for a number of years, and that meant it was my job to take and knock on somebody's door and say, hi, well, we have an allegation that you've been doing this thing. You've been hurting your infant or messing around with your teenage daughter or stuff. It was a terrifying job. And I became so aware of how many little children, teens, were traumatized by just awful situations. And after that, I got a different job where I was working with runaway, throwaway teenagers. And the same ones we didn't really protect when they were children, weren't getting served as teenagers. And so I developed from both of these positions a really strong interest in what can we do for people who have gone through an event and survive that event, but continue to be negatively affected by that. And that was what got me curious and interested in what I could do. And I began studying what was going on and tried to learn what I could. And what I found was that the work I was trained to do with people like that seemed to be just extremely painful to them, which made it painful to me. And it took a really long time. And it didn't work. I could have lived with the first two, but I couldn't live with the third one, that a painful treatment didn't seem to have benefit. Some people got better, a bit better. I was thinking now, in spite of what I was doing. So there I was, functioning as an effective roadblock on the way to mental health for people that had been traumatized. And I was doing what they told me to do. So I started doing the opposite of what people told me to do. And I guess that was the birth of what I then called rapid resolution therapy. And I want to get to your question. I didn't forget it. You said who benefits from this? And people who benefit from this are people who are having issues with anxiety, with panic disorder, with PTSD, with insomnia, with relationship issues, with sexual problems. Basically, people benefit who are looking to have their minds work better, who are looking to have their minds work more effectively. And that can range from people whose minds are really working pretty terribly, wanting to get somewhere near normal, but also people who just want a deep tune-up to more effectively be living their lives, enjoying their lives, and doing what's best for self and others. So I guess the answer to the question, the short answer, I'm not good at short answers, but short answer probably would have been just everyone. I wouldn't have had to say all that.
No, definitely having that background in the history of how it developed really helps, because I know that when I was a budding clinical social worker, I was doing these evidence-based therapies, and I found it incredibly difficult, and it was a long process, and it was incredibly draining because my clients would be working hard and they weren't finding much progress. And also particularly like with veterans, and then what the VA is doing is they're putting them through these therapies that require them to be re-traumatized on the way to healing. And that just doesn't make any sense to me. So when I found you and saw in these videos what you were doing with clients, and it was so significantly different because it wasn't requiring anybody to be re-traumatized. It was very gentle process and creative process.
You know, I hear what you said about the treatment, and personally, I haven't been part of that. I don't have any experience with what's going on with treatment by the VA for veterans, other than what I hear from you and other veterans who have gone there to sample the wares, so to speak. And I understand they're telling me that there are three things going on. And one is lots and lots of effort is spent attempting to get people to re-experience these horrendous moments that they've already survived. Two, people are getting lots and lots and lots of medications. And three, veterans that I've met who, because of things that happened, have been on some kind of funding from the government in order to survive, have the impression, and it's probably true, that they better not get better, or it will significantly, or it's going to take away the funding that they're having and counting on and living on. So I can't imagine something that would be less effective than those three things at once: drug people, traumatize people, and tell them that if they get better, they'll go broke. So I don't know. That's what I hear is happening there. I haven't experienced it myself, other than hearing from so many folks. I'm looking to be able to cause things to clear up, to get wonderful people like yourself and other practitioners to have the understanding and skill that will enable people to get better quickly and painlessly and completely. And I have spoken to people that have met with you, and that's what I'm being told. And people are shocked, because they're saying that was fun, and I didn't cry, and I didn't scream, and I wasn't mourning, and I was having fun, and Kendra was fun, and we laughed. But, well, that's nice. I'm glad you had a good time, but how are you doing? Mm-hmm. Well, how I'm doing is I don't have nightmares. How I'm doing is I can, I took my wife to a restaurant last night and I blew her mind. Mm-hmm. What'd you do? I mean, I blew her mind. What'd you do? I sat with my back to the door, and she couldn't, it took her 2 minutes to be able to say anything about it. And finally, she just said, "Sweetie, are you okay?" And I said, "More than okay." So that's what I'm hearing about the work you've done.
Mm-hmm. And I remember a veteran that I met with, you hear about veterans getting strongly reacting from fireworks and hearing fireworks and seeing fireworks. And after a rapid resolution therapy session, they can watch the fireworks without even realizing they had been troubled by it, until they remembered they were troubled, but they're no longer feeling troubled anymore.
Yeah, and then don't even remember it.
Yeah. Do you remember a Marine that you worked with, Joe?
Oh, that was quite a while back.
Yes.
Yeah. What a wonderful fella he was. He was so devoted to his heroic lieutenant. And when they were on an operation together, his lieutenant was killed, and he did what the lieutenant would have insisted he do, which is like step over him and run up the stairs. He had to get up the stairs. Lieutenant's body was on the stairs, and he said to me, he said, "Yeah, I stepped over this guy I love like he was a pile of garbage." And that continued to resonate in his mind, and felt awful about it. And then when we put a light on that, because that's a distortion, and distortion can't live in the shadow. And when there was some light on it, and he recognized that his lieutenant was so proud of him and would have been so pissed if he did it any other way. And that no longer resonated in an awful way for him. And he could feel pride again in what he accomplished. You know, a Marine did scary, dangerous, awful things, made incredible sacrifices, gets done with the whole thing, and the predominant feeling is guilt and shame. Well, guilt, shame, and fear. Guilt, shame, and fear. I remember when I met that fella, he said, "Sir, please forgive me, but I'll need to check the perimeter before we can talk." And I had like an L-shaped room, and there was a bathroom attached to it, and he wanted to survey the whole thing. And finally, when he got it, that nobody was going to be in there, that he didn't see come through a particular door that he was facing, then he could sit and talk with me. And then when I met him years later and learned how all that not only changed, but of course remain changed, because with what we're doing with RRT, it doesn't come back. It can't come back.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it, Kendra, as what happens if you shine a light on something. I mean, think of the little boy who's screaming, and Dad comes in and says, "What is it, son?" And he says, "There's a monster right there. There's a monster right over there by my closet." And Dad says to him, "Well, let's blast it." And he pulls out a flashlight and he blasts what the boy thought was a monster. And the little boy says, "That's my bathrobe. That's not a monster." And Dad said, "Well, turn the flashlight off," because he gave it to him. The little boy turned it off, and Dad said, "Well, is it a monster now in the dark?" And the little guy giggled and said, "Not anymore, because that light disappeared the shadow. And in that shadow is where shame and guilt and grief and horror continue to eat away at those who have already survived, continue to eat away at our heroes." So what a privilege to be able to hand people the flashlight, and what an amazing privilege to hand you the flashlight, because you duplicated that, and you hand out flashlights right and left all day long and make all those shadows disappear.
And how long did that take you to do it, Joe?
Oh gosh, I'm thinking we were together almost 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot to do.
Yeah, but only 2 hours?
It wasn't quite, but it was almost 2 hours, as I remember. That one was quite a while back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it works in a different way. It works by shining a light, rather than the way I was taught to work, which was to sort of force people into a re-experiencing of these horrible situations in order to bleed the emotion out of them. There are people, there aren't just people, there are the majority of people who are believing that the solution for somebody being traumatized is they need to get the pus out, they need to get the pain out. And the only way that they get it out is by expressing it. And the only way to express it is to experience it. And so very well-meaning counselors and therapists are doing everything they can to cause people to re-experience the very worst moments of their lives in order to finally get rid of the feeling. But all you need to do to get rid of it is to use a flashlight.
Right. Yeah.
See, what happens, Kendra, as you know, is our inner mind, thing people call self, things that you and I call unconscious, is experiencing these awful experiences that have happened as if they are happening or as if they are just about to happen or as if they just finished happening.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take any moment of your life that was awful and you experience it as happening right now or about to happen in a minute, or, well, it's not happening any longer, but it was a minute ago, then, you know, of course people are experiencing that horror, and it perpetuates so there's what we call an unconscious preoccupation that sometimes goes up to the surface and becomes conscious, which is even worse. And I don't know if this makes sense, but I think well-meaning counselors are trying to get things that are unconsciously preoccupying people to have them think about those things to get rid of the feelings, but it ends up causing them to be consciously preoccupied with it, which is worse than unconsciously preoccupied with it, which means most people are smart enough to say, I don't want to talk about it. And if you say, why wouldn't you want to talk about it? Because it makes me feel miserable to talk about it. So if I can do something else, then I'll be better than if I have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so people have told me it required more courage to go to therapy than it did to go into the traumatizing situation. And people have told me that therapy was more painful than the trauma. Not for 1 minute of therapy as opposed to 1 minute of trauma, but there might have been 7 minutes of trauma and 7 years of therapy. So when you add up all those minutes, they say, no, the cure was certainly worse.
Yeah, I believe it. But when you talk about how someone is still being affected by an event that's no longer happening, I think that really helps people who are watching this or veterans to know when they're deployed and they're in these experiences and why they continue to have these troubling effects. It's not them causing them. This is just something that has gotten stored within the subconscious that continues to happen even though the event is no longer happening.
It's affecting our heroes. I meet with veterans. I meet with many first responders, firefighter that risking her life over and over, but in the process of doing that, saw some really awful things, had children die in her arms. That's an awful thing to go through, but it's a worse thing to go through it every single night. And she already went through it. She doesn't need to go through it every night. And she certainly doesn't need to go through it in a therapy session. And so turn the light on and you get the good news. I imagine a soldier who's crawling through a swamp and it's wet and it's ugly and there are bugs and there are snakes and it's like awful stuff. It's like awful stuff all the time. But we got to find him because we have some really good news. And the good news to share is the war is over and you won. And you're not in any swamp. And you don't have to keep your head down. And that's a bathrobe, not a monster.
Yeah.
And that realization, see, we know people aren't like built in one piece, Kendra. That's why you hear people say, I wish I could control myself, discipline myself, motivate myself. And so many people saying things like, I hate myself. And it's because this other facet of the mind, it's like these two facets of our mind, the part that we're conscious of and the rest, they see the world so differently. They don't know what to make of each other. And so what we do to try to get people better is we attempt to be reasonable with the part of the mind that that's able to reason. But that part of the mind most likely already has gotten the good news. So if somebody, you meet some vet and he says, I hear a firecracker and I'm going to jump in a freaking hole. It's just awful. I mean, you can consciously address it. You can say, oh, well, guess what? Firecrackers are firecrackers. Just drop it. After you light the fuse, you'll be okay. It's a little thing.
But subconsciously, it feels very
Right.
different.
It's, I know that. Well, then, what's the problem? Why'd you just jump onto your couch? Well, because the rest of his mind doesn't know that. And so what I paid attention to in developing this process is how you communicate to the rest of the mind so that that part of the mind that you're trying to control and discipline gets it, and all facets of the mind are on the same page. And then that whole notion of needing to control myself and, for goodness sake, hating myself evaporates, and evaporates quickly.
Yeah, and it makes sense to do those things that target the subconscious because that's where troubling thoughts and feelings and emotions come from.
I believe that that's where all the emotions are coming from. And I believe that with the right tools, we can eliminate so much of what is causing so much suffering.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier about something that veterans suffer from, and that's guilt. And I don't think I've found a veteran who hasn't experienced guilt. It's such a powerful emotion. And the cognitive behavior therapies that they have going on in the VA inadequately address guilt. So even if they're going through those therapies, they're still dealing with guilt, but RRT is so profound in addressing that and clearing that. Can you share just a little bit about guilt?
Sure. Well, you said the cognitive people are inadequately addressing guilt. I think it's far better than not, though. If I had a friend that was feeling very guilty and there was the opportunity that he could see somebody who was practicing cognitive behavioral therapy, I would much prefer that to nothing. And if you reason adroitly enough and long enough and persistently enough with the top part of the mind, it does eventually, but rather slowly, it can sink in. It doesn't sink in quickly. Well, that's in terms of cognitive stuff that's different from the other stuff that I used to do with people, which wasn't cognitive. It was designed to get the feelings out. That was not a cognitive approach. Somebody working cognitively, I think, is likely to be doing significantly more good than harm. I think what I was doing was often more harm than good, other than the person could at least get, I was meaning well. So the person, he's a good guy. He's not trying to hurt me. It's just what we were going through was awful. I haven't forgotten your question about guilt. And the guilt is coming from, I believe, this sense, this feeling that we should have done more and should have done better. No other life form has ever had a thought like that. And by the way, I think they're all doing a whole lot better than humans. No other life form has had a thought like that. And I think we can get guilt out of the way when, well, let me be more specific. Nobody's guilty unless they want things to be better for others. Mm-hmm. So if you say to somebody, gosh, you just knocked that elderly lady down and I think she's hurt her hip. And he giggles and says, cool. Well, he probably doesn't have a guilt problem. So those of us who have had guilt problems have guilt problems because we care. Mm-hmm. So how do we, with RRT, resolve a guilt problem? We first get it. Hey, the reason you're guilty is because you care about others. Yes. And you being guilty isn't good for other people. Other people would be better if you weren't guilty. I said, well, how is it better for anybody else? I know it's killing me. So you're driving next to an 18-wheeler and you're both going about 70 miles an hour. How preoccupied do you want the truck driver? Whoa, not at all. Well, I'm guilty. No, that'd be a preoccupation. Well, don't you want to know what he did wrong? I don't care. It's better for me if he's not guilty. Mm-hmm. And it's so much better for other people when we can blast the shadow that's holding the guilt with that light. It's better for them. I met with a lady and she had terrible pain in her hands, and I said, well, would it be all right if your hands were better? And she said, I don't like to think about that. Well, why? And she said, because I don't deserve to have my hands stop hurting. And then she winced because they hurt that bad. I said, why? She said, because I have a wonderful husband and I should have been treating him better. But I did things wrong and now I'm suffering. And we wiggled through it and got rid of the guilt. And I'll tell you, that guy sure had a pretty happy expression when his wife was no longer guilty about not having treated him better previously and was fully energized with, again, functioning hands to be pleasing him then. So, yes. So all we need to do is capture what guilt is really about, which is the desire for things to be better for others, and let that desire come to fruition where things actually are better. So there were times you were dealing with a significant amount of guilt. And I can tell you that you wouldn't be putting 16 hours a day into doing the work that you do if you were guilty any longer, because it's like trying to get things done with a big backpack full of rocks. Yeah. Guilt is out of the way and energy is there, and then we can really serve the world. Definitely. We can really be there for each other.
because that's what the interest is. And I know particularly veterans have a strong interest in serving and having a purpose again, and that's what it's all about. And there's the survivor's guilt and the moral injury is something that is significant with the veteran population. So I appreciate you speaking a little bit on that, because it's really helpful, those stories and those metaphors that you use, because those are actually one of those techniques that you're talking about, to speak to the subconscious, is using stories and metaphors.
Using all kinds of things that that the mind at that deeper, I guess, level gets, understands, and can respond to. Every part of everybody is well-meaning, and on the side of that person, we because our minds are complicated, it feels to many people like they're their own worst enemy, like one part of them's trying to hurt another part of them. It's not ever true. Your foot isn't trying to figure out how to destroy your arm. No part of our mind wants to hurt any other part. No part of our being wants to destroy the whole. But it's so complicated, and there's so much dysfunction that our really complicated, advanced, complicated minds work a whole lot better with a tune-up. And Kendra, everybody knows that about everything else. Everybody knows that everything, anything that's pretty complicated needs maintenance. You know, if somebody said you might think you should take your car into for a tune-up, you don't think, why? That's terrible. If the phone says I need to run a bug fix, I don't go, this is amazing. Why would it need that? But people think that their own minds should be working well out of the box, no matter what they're subjected to, and that's not the case. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole lot of people who have decided to not avail themselves of counseling or therapy because most of the time it doesn't work.
Yeah, there's actually one more thing I would love for you to speak on before we wrap this up, is a veteran that female veteran that you worked with at the Delray training, that you met with and did some RRT with, and she was having some physical issues.
Oh, what a lovely lady.
Veterans deal with so many physical issues after what they put their body through with all of the training. And
yeah, this lady, I just felt that somehow I had to have her in the front of the room, and she's walking with a walker, and a great deal of pain, and she sat in front of me and said that, I said, well, I thought, you know, she was there because of all that pain and dealing with this disability. And I said, what would we address that would make a difference for you? And she said, rage. And I said, really? Well, what happened? And she said, I got raped. And I'm enraged about it all day. And she said, you know, I'm in a whole lot of physical pain, and I'm very sure that being enraged every day isn't comforting me, isn't making me feel any better, but it's like grinding the pain to be much worse. And I feel it because when I get conscious of the rage, then the pain in my body becomes so much more intense. And that rape was 43 years ago, 43 years before I met with her. And she was so excited and so happy to have that disappear. And then even happier that the pain in her body went way, way down. And then still happier that she didn't need that walker any longer. Uh, and I hesitate to even share that because it sounds a little, to me, and you know, what this like some snake oil salesman, you know, buy this elixir and it will take care of, you know, every disease you've never heard of and all the ones you have. But her mind was attempting to get her to stop something from happening that she felt was so wrong. But it was trying to get her to get it to stop when it already stopped more than 40 years ago. And when the rest of her mind got the good news, you know, the war is over and you won. The rage was gone. And I remember at the end of that visit with her, somebody raised their hand and I said, "Do you have a question for me?" And this gal said, "No, I don't." And I said, "Well, why did you raise your hand then?" And he said, "Because I have a question for her." And I said, "Well, what's that question?" And the question was to this lady who'd had this 43 years worth of rage. How do you feel about him now? How do you feel about that guy now? And she said, "Well, I hope he's okay." The person said, "You hope he's okay? Why would you hope he's okay?" And she said, "Well, because he certainly wasn't okay or he wouldn't have raped me. And if he's okay, it's going to be better for everybody." And all that rage flipped around. So thank you for the happy memory of bringing that lovely lady to mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know that during our conversation here, we've been talking mostly around veterans and trauma that they've experienced, but I know that RRT is really effective for all types of trauma, and specifically something that you're passionate about is alleviating sexual trauma for anybody who's experienced that, and you even have your own nonprofit to make sure that—
Yeah, Institute for Survivors of Sexual Violence. And I just was so, you know, horrified by the terrible effect of childhood abuse and sexual trauma. I wanted to make sure that people who had suffered in those ways, I want this thing that I developed and that you mastered to do what both of us want, which is to end suffering, and to end suffering regardless of where somebody is financially. And that's what you're all about. And that's what I'm all about. And you and I both care, you know, I mean, it's not that that's your mission and this is mine. You're absolutely passionately interested in making things okay for people that have been raped, coerced, subjected to sexual violence. And I'm looking for things to be okay. And you know that for people who have had horrible things happen in the military. It's just that we got to get all those torches across the finish line, and you're carrying that one, I'm carrying that one. We're both carrying all of them, I think.
Yeah,
so it's a privilege to be connected with you there.
We're definitely stronger together and reaching more people together. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me here and sharing about rapid resolution therapy. I feel like I'm talking to one of the most influential people of the 21st century. So thank you. I'm so grateful for you putting this out there and the lives that you're changing with rapid resolution therapy. And I would tell anybody who's watching this and they're interested in receiving rapid resolution therapy for themselves, or if anybody is interested, a mental health practitioner, to do the trainings, to please visit rapidresolutiontherapy.com for more
Thank
information.
you. And if I could just say a couple of things, I'll go quick. There's a page, if you go to that website, Rapid Resolution Therapy, just the way it would be spelled, rapidresolutiontherapy.com, called resources. And if you would click on that page of resources, there's a really good audio recording, at least I'm hearing it's good, that I put out there that's designed to really strengthen the immune system and get people to stay healthy through this pandemic that we're dealing with. And there's a film on eliminating fear. It's all about fear, and where you hear the way I think about that, and I work with 3 different people live, so you can actually watch that whole process. And I do have a book out called Life-Changing Conversations, which demonstrates how people's lives can completely change and improve because of one single conversation. And you can download the first chapter of that book also on our resource page. So there's a lot we're looking to put out for people who just are willing to come in and grab it. And it's my intention that we build that resource page more and more and more. So it's just filled with free things that can make people better.
Definitely. You're changing more lives than you know.
It was wonderful to be with you, Kendra.
Thank you, Dr. Connelly.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Have a good night.